Am I looking at you now?
I just hit live. Yeah, just look at the webcam. If you want, we want to look right into the eyes of the people watching. Hey everybody, welcome back for episode number 6 of Why I Learn, a brand new show by Prenda. This has been really fun for me to experiment with this medium. We're now streaming on YouTube and Facebook at the same time, and excited that several of you have been watching it and reaching out and talking to us about the topic of why you learn and what learning looks like for you. So it's been super interesting. Thanks to the guests who have been on so far. I think last week I started it with a rant by myself, and then I had four guests in a row, Brittany and Blake and Kevin and Gibran. And thank you to all of you guys for participating. I've got a couple more interviews lined up for the rest of this week and early next week. So this is a fun part of my job, just to be able to meet people, hear their stories. For today, I wanted to kind of digest a little bit of what we've been talking about and do that with Rachelle. Rachelle and I work together closely on Prenda. So Rachelle's part of the Prenda team, has a really important job of being the one that really talks to the guides and the families as people are kind of coming in the door. Rachelle knows almost everyone by first name in Prenda, which is kind of a fun place to be. And she just really embodies a learner in so many ways. So glad you're here, Rachelle. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. This is super fun.
Yeah.
I haven't watched all the episodes, but I've watched a few, and I'm really excited about this.
Sure. Well, yeah, I think hopefully this conversation will add to it. I think one of the things that I've been noticing as I've talked to people about why they learn and going into detail on some of the learning experiences of their life is, there are really strong human motivations for learning. I can think of a few that came up in the interviews. Like Brittany said, I want to learn because there's like some problem I want to solve or something I want to do. I think it was like she wanted a pillow or a particular type of pillow and didn't have it or couldn't find it anywhere. And so she decided she needed to learn how to sew so that she could make that pillow. And I think you see that a lot, right? Like kids, especially in the tech space where I've spent a lot of time, kids want to make some video game. It's like, I want to make this game or this website. And so then they ask questions like, well, what would I need to do to make that game? I'm thinking of a particular mutual friend of ours that's, I think, probably 17 now, 16, 17, that's been really diving into the Unity platform for 3-dimensional graphics and making, virtual reality and immersive video games. And he's gotten really good at it. But it all started for him with like, I want to make this thing, and what do I need to learn to do that? I think one of the other conversations led to kind of a more selfish reason, not in a bad way, but just I learned because it's fun and I'm interested, and my brain just is curious and I want to learn things. It's interesting to hear people talk about it that way. And I think a lot of us can kind of resonate with that. Like something, like, oh, it's fun to be the world expert on, table tennis players or whatever. I'd be curious.
I just ping pong table this last week.
Yeah, there you go. Now you know. There's this great quote from The Office where he's like, all my favorite heroes are table tennis players. Rachelle, I'd love to hear from you. Just what are the reasons that you learn, or what personally motivates you? I've watched you learn several things over the last several years of knowing you, but even more recently working together.
I feel that's a great question.
Why do you learn, Rachelle Gibson?
Usually I learn because I want to be good at something. Like, let's take the fact that I work for Prenda as an example.
Yeah.
Like I had a conversation with you, found out about it on a Saturday, had a conversation with you that day, visited 3 classrooms. The next Friday was at your house and said, I have to work for you. I had no concept of what I would be doing and working for you. But you were like, well, nobody's doing this yet, so we need help with that. But I was so blown away by what you'd created that I was like, no, everybody's going to want to do this.
Yeah.
So it was like talking about it. So talking about it was really easy for me because I was like absolutely all in on it, and I really loved talking to people. So it didn't feel like there was a lot of learning there. But then figuring out how to talk to more people in what ways to talk to people. And then I ended up, like, I think the most recent learning for me has been being in management. Like in September, we restructured and I ended up with people that sometimes refer to me as a boss, which feels really weird. And I got really scared that I wouldn't, that there was some deficit in me because I'd never done this before.
Right.
And then I just stopped and thought, okay, I'm good with people. Managing is, and then sort of like went out and talked to some people. Anyway, so I would say need has been my greatest driver in learning stuff.
And the need came from this feeling of excelling or wanting to do well at them. I mean, you think about, Prenda's a good example, and developing yourself as a leader and a quote manager. I think it's interesting to look back. That's probably always been in you. I mean, people may or may not know about your history with collegiate throwing competitions as a track and field star. But I don't know, would you say that showed up as you were, going to UCLA and Columbia for these throwing sports and working hard? Was it sort of like, I want to win, Was that
Absolutely. Yes. I think there was leadership in that. And also it's interesting because before we came on, I didn't know what you were going to want to talk about. So I thought through in my mind, like moments in my life when I feel like I've learned.
Yeah.
Never in school.
Okay.
Like never once can I think of a time in school that no, that's not true. 4th grade, I was in homeschool and there was this really great world history curriculum. And I got really into world history and I ended up graduating in history because of that 4th grade, like really digging what I was learning.
Wow, that carried you a long way. That's amazing.
It is. And that's the one time in school that I can think that I cared about learning. I got decent grades, probably not quite as high as yours, but close enough, ditched a lot of school, decided that was more important than being in school. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on a learning podcast, but being an athlete, like I became a student of the sport. Like I became a really good coach because I didn't take to throwing, like it wasn't supernatural to me. And so and the same as a math teacher as well. I'm not great at math, so I can teach it well because it's not innate for me. And so it's really interesting to me as I guess this is teaching, but you have to learn it to teach it. And I feel like diving into things that don't come naturally, that aren't just there, like God-given, whatever.
Right.
Like, that's when I see myself learning. Like,
does part of you think that that's just a myth? That this whole idea of, like, for example, I'll watch LeBron James play basketball, and I like basketball. I'm terrible at it. But I'll watch, and it's like, this man was like born to do this, right? So part of me is like, it's gotta be just like, this is a person who was like born a certain way, and here he is like using what was given to him to excel at a sport. And then you read about what he does, and his effort, right? And the time and commitment and ability that gets put in. And there's very few people in the world that put in that much time on anything, right? So it's like, it's interesting to me. I believe in natural ability, obviously, but I think we overrate that consistently is part of me. And maybe like part of what's made you such a good learner is feeling like you were coming from a place of deficiency in the first place, right? It was like you had to compensate for, well, I didn't start out with math being easy for me. I didn't start out throwing a shot put or discus easily. So I had to like then do this work of becoming a learner. Like you said, a student of the sport. I think it's probably something interesting in that.
That is because I had a pretty, this significant lack of worth through the majority of my life. And so there was a lot of like learning to prove that I'm worth something.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful motivator. Actually, I hadn't thought about that till right now.
Some people.
It's a sad and powerful motivator.
Yeah, I know. We got to a dark place. Sorry to those of you who are watching right now. The bright side is Rachelle's a superstar and worth a lot. And I
can feel.
And she feels it. So I want to dig into you. I think you have, maybe in part because of this, but also because of all the experiences you've had, learning yourself, but also being like a coach and a guide for other people to learn. You've seen people not do it. I mean, my theory is that every human is born wanting to learn. There's this like natural curiosity, but there's a lot of reasons why we don't. The things that get in the way of that motivation, that kind of limit us, trap us, block us. I would love to just understand from you as you kind of like think through, and I know this is sort of just off the cuff, but are there things that you see over and over again kind of impeding someone from making that desire or making that decision to be a learner? And this could be kids or adults. I don't know.
Absolutely. And I think it applies to everybody. It still applies to me in some places, and it may still apply to you in some places. But in talking to parents and kids and guides at Prenda, I put words around, I think, what I maybe already understood. And Brene Brown would have been an influence with this for me.
Shout out to Brene Brown.
This idea of, I call it armor, like I talk about armor a lot when I talk at Prenda. And it's, so first of all, where armor comes from, I think that's part of the conversation. I would say for a lot of kids specifically, because I know that your premise here is like learning isn't only in school, and oftentimes is not in school, but it happens in other places. For me, it was other places.
Yeah.
But particularly when we think about learning, we associate that with school. So let's go to there first. Like a kid who doesn't fit the mold about something. Like I just talked to a mom yesterday whose son isn't a great reader. He's like genius at math, and he isn't a great reader, but he left second grade feeling very dumb. The math ability didn't carry enough to like overcome the deficiency he saw in himself in reading.
Yep.
And his brain is just, reading is really hard for his brain. And she has seen, as he's been in an environment where all learning is encouraged. He's in a Prenda class. She was in tears talking about him seeing himself as smart and capable, and to go from second to fourth grade and see that switch is amazing. So I think for a lot of us, our armor comes young. I would imagine that for most people, it's like, and when I say trauma, I'm very carefully using that because I know that there are things that that I think there are traumatic things in an educational environment, and that would be an extreme word to use. So I'm going to say pain.
Right.
Just pain around maybe a personality trait, it may be a subject, reading, writing, grammar, whatever, math, whatever, a lot. And I was a high school math teacher, so much armor around math. And just like, I can't. And once you go, I can't, you can't, Yeah.
So explain to people like what you mean by armor and maybe the mechanism. You're talking about some sort of event or pain that's inflicted. Someone told you can't. Maybe it's just getting back a consistent stream of papers with a letter.
Yes, exactly. So the way I talk about this, and I've probably said this 100 times or more, but that I would say the vast majority of us at some point fairly early in our education encountered some sort of pain. And again, around one of these things, whether it's something about us, a subject, but the human response to that kind of pain is to say, I'm never going to feel that pain again. And so rather than expose that part of us, like I'm saying, this is my math part, let's say. I'm not going to expose that math part of me anymore, so I'm going to cover that up, and I call that armor. So it's obviously not actual armor, but putting a piece of armor on so that I'm not showing the world. So now the result of that may be I hate math, and I become aggressive against math, and it's because I felt the deficiency, but I can't go there with myself, so I have to make it external, and math is now bad.
Right. So it could come across as sort of a negative outlook. It could come across as what are the other? I've seen people kind of pretend.
Pretending, not being able to show up. Kids who don't know how to read, but they've memorized so much. They don't know how to read till third grade because they're that good at that, but they have something
right. They can just kind of coast. I've seen a lot of adults actually early in my career. You enter the workforce and you think, oh, wow, like these people are all professionals. And I would sit through whole meetings, like an hour at a time, where there were all of this language and jargon being kind of like bantered back and forth. And my intuition was like, I have no idea what's going on, but I was like too afraid to say anything, right? And in retrospect, it's like they didn't actually know either, right? It took me actually, there's other times in my life where I've seen somebody that understands something that's that kind of like transcends the jargon and gets to a place of like, I can actually talk about this in a way that like you understand, I understand, what we mean. And I've seen that at times in precious instances, but I think a lot of adults go around like pretending, for like maybe hiding.
Yes, totally. I would say pretending is a major indicator of armor.
Yeah.
Also, like, I know a lot of adults that writing an email, writing anything, and because email is so prevalent in our culture,
right,
like, there is anxiety, and it goes back to its armor around something that happened to them around writing when they were young. Like, we have at least one person on our team that feels that.
Yeah.
And real and the armor. So here's the other thing I've realized, and I've realized this really recently. It's that if there's any sort of, I'm trying to think of the right word, because it's not discomfort, because learning is uncomfortable. So it's not that. If there's any kind of anxiety, let's say anxiety, which armor is like one of the things that armor goes along with is anxiety. So if there's anxiety in a learning environment, the conclusion I've come to with no scientific, I'm sure scientists have figured this out, but what I see is that a kid or an adult can't access the part of their brain that learns when there's anxiety present. And so they're in some level of fight or flight. And in fight or flight, because of whatever's happening in their classroom, whatever's happening at work, in fight or flight, you can't learn. And so you have to be in an environment of joy in order to actually learn.
Right.
And so you have to eliminate those things that cause fight or flight in your.
Try to get to a place where you're safe enough that you can like quiet all those voices in your head, and then say something hard, like, and you hear these powerful stories from the Prenda micro schools, but I'm sure they're happening in other places too, where a loving adult is there and you feel that connection and safety, where a child will look at something that they don't understand and just say, I don't know that, and we want to always add the word yet, right? Like, I don't know that yet. And that implies like, here we go, we just watched my son, speaking of figure it out, my son Asher had saved up his money to buy a little projector, and he created a movie screen, and we were in the pool watching a movie, and the question was, what movie? And of course, it's either Jaws or Finding Nemo, because it's got to be an ocean theme.
I hope it was Finding Nemo.
It was Finding Nemo because the younger siblings were there, and we just didn't want to scare anybody. So we're watching Finding Nemo, and there's this part in the movie. I've always loved this film. I mean, I feel like Pixar is master storytellers, and they capture these things about humanity that I think other people struggle. It's like a picture is 1,000 words. Like a good story is 1,000,000 words. You can show so much truth in what happens. And there's this part where Marlon, the dad, has been, battling the whole ocean, trying to get to his son, and everything's hard. And he like encounters his fears. He kind of like opens up with the turtles. If you remember, I'm getting into detail about this movie, but he's riding with the sea turtles on this current, and they're in there, and he's terrified. And this hilarious part where the like baby turtle is like, we're gonna have a great jump today, and he like basically shoves him out, and Marlon gets like tossed around on this whole thing, and it's like, whew, there's this like sense of relief, because he's gone through this learning cycle, which started with armor and fear, and it started with like, I can't do that, I don't even know what's going on, and then like experientially encountering the discomfort through the discomfort, and for him that was a very physical, swirling around in a current in the ocean, and then he's like landed, and he gets a chance to breathe and look back on it, and it's like there's a higher level of confidence as he turns to the next phase, which is this big open ocean, and Dory, the character played by Ellen DeGeneres, is just so good, and she says, P. Sherman 42 Wallaby Way Sydney, and he goes, yep. And it's just this like, it's like, bring on the next challenge. I guess that's kind of what I saw at this time around, and kind of looking at that movie through this like learner mentality is like, after having done it once, there's this confidence that builds, and it's like, start taking off the armor, because that's the way that I know future learning can happen. Like, I want the next thing because I love what happens to me as a learner. I don't know, that was probably more than I needed to go.
That was awesome. And now I will never watch a movie the same again. Any movie Like now that you've said that, I'm gonna watch every movie for
Gotta
like
search for truth.
where the armor is coming off. And
Yeah. No,
when
this,
when you talked about in the boardroom or in your work environments where people were just using like lingo, I think as adults, the most powerful thing we can say is like, I don't know what that means, or I don't know in general.
right. What does that acronym mean? Can you please explain it? Yeah.
I do it all the time.
You totally.
And if you can, and there are times when I don't want to be that person, and then somebody else that I'm on a call with will ask the question. I'm like, why didn't this? Like, what kept me from asking the question? Like, what arm of me didn't want to look dumb, or didn't want to look uneducated, or didn't want to look whatever? Because like I have a position at Prenda that, and you know this, that I'm getting better and better, but there are days when I'm like, I have no qualifications for what I do, you know? And like, I don't really have paper qualifications for what I do.
Right.
I'm totally qualified for what I do, but if I allow myself to go into that place of I wasn't meant for this somehow, I become paralyzed. And you can't, and again, it's the fight or flight. Like you can't learn in a paralyzed state. And so just being able to say, at Prenda, we've started saying a lot, never be afraid to say you're a beginner.
Never be afraid to be a beginner. Yeah, that's what Cassidy says. I love it. I think it's so good. And just acknowledging that, because that's where learning can happen. You know, you said about watching movies differently, but I have a lot of friends who insist on nonfiction books only, right? It's like, in a way, this is kind of a form of armor, because it's like, I've got to be a serious person. Like, this is what serious people read. And so they like go peruse all the business and social science, and they read these books, and there's all kinds of good stuff in these books. But I've like made a point of trying to force myself to read fiction in a way, because there's these like additional truths that you can like approximate, even if you can't even, like, I can't articulate. I couldn't write I could write an essay, I guess, good enough to get a 5 on the AP test, because I did that. I knew the formula, but like to do real like insight and literary criticism, I don't know how to do that. But to sit there and say, oh, there's something there, and to try to kind of share and discuss about that, I encourage everybody to read some fiction or watch some movies and think about them. Well, Rachelle, we ran out of time. It's so fun to talk to you. I mean, I'm sure we'll have you back lots of times on this on the show as we go forward. But thanks for taking a minute with me.
Thanks, Kelly. Have a great one.
Okay, see ya.